Hi, folks. We're back for part two of our discussion of the offense in that Week 3 loss to the Colts. This is Filmstudy, and I'm Ken McCusick. Joined here by Gabe Ferguson, my friend, and Gabe. A game that we still have to blame, I think, on the offense overall. Let them really take the heat for this one. I don't think it was the defense's fault.
Yeah, the defense played phenomenal, throughout the entire game. Came up with many critical stops, got the ball back to the offense and good field position frequently. And the offense just couldn't put together, three plays when they needed it most. And I think a lot of the frustration from this game can be pinned on the offensive line performance. A lot of pressures, sacks, bad snap, led to some turnovers, etc. So I think we want to kind of go into some of the individual performances here, and let's start with Patrick McCarry, who really came off a very strong week, week 2 against Cincinnati, where I think he had a complete clean sheet, maybe one pressure the entire game. He was very, very good in that performance against a very tough competition in Trey Hendrickson. High expectations coming into this week as well, but what did you see in this week that might have been a little bit different than we saw last time?
Yeah, you're right. He did a fantastic job against Hendrickson. It might have been 2 total pressures, like 1 full and 2 halves against Hendrickson, but it was good. And this week, not nearly as good. He got beaten for a full sack by Ebukam that was just a turn the corner as fast as you can kind of sack. Obviously, Ebukam is a guy who would probably be projected because of the combination of quickness and length to give McCarry trouble. And he did. He had another sack where Lamar miraculously got out of it. We talked about this a little bit on the first episode, and ran for 14 yards. And then there was an insult to injury defensive holding that got tacked onto that. So, a bad moment for McCarry on that play that Lamar made all right. And that's what you get with Lamar Jackson. You occasionally get a problem solved for an offensive lineman. McCarry didn't have any other negative events in this game, which was part of why his overall grade is not too bad, despite giving up 2 sacks one actual sack and another near sack. So he had 7 missed blocks in the game. They had 3 losses at the line of scrimmage. Among those, one of them was the second one to Ebukam, and a hold that he got away with, which was, it didn't get flagged, so he got away with it. That's great. I did take his entire adjustment away from him. And normally I have a small positive adjustment I add to reflect the quality of competition primarily above the replacement level that the player is facing. So it's strictly positive in that standpoint, but also anything else that's not really covered by the system. So in this case, he didn't get a sack. He got run out of a sack. And so he lost his adjustment, which is effectively like losing 3 points. If he'd actually given up the sack, he would have lost 6 points. So I think it's actually a pretty fair reflection of the situation. He had 8 blocks in level 2, 1 out of 2 on pulls. And that was a general problem for the left side I want to talk about. And he had 2 highlight combination blocks. So a B in this game for him, and 0.81 is kind of at the bottom of the B range, which I see I've got wrong on the notes sheet I sent you there, but that's the way I saw it. I know PFF had him scored somewhat lower, and that's despite the fact we kind of agree, factor by factor on what went on. And that's not always the case. Usually, it's oftentimes been the case where I've had McCarry wrote it a little lower.
Yeah, I know some of that can come into how the adjustments are being made, or how particular plays are being weighted in the run blocking versus the pass blocking. And PFF, for example, might have given him a very poor grade on that whiff block where Lamar was able to escape it. And you said you took away his adjustment. So there's some similar types of adjustments that are happening there. But even then, a B, that's not the worst grade. Were there things that you saw in the run game that you liked, or is it something that you think is maybe a concern?
Good mobility to get to level 2. He was looking to go to level 2 play after play after play in the run. The Ravens had some general problems. Mustipher and Zeitler each were downfield illegally on a pass play. Neither one was flagged. But that's a real bugaboo for me, and I always give a 0 on the blocking grade when that happens, because if that is flagged, It's a 5-yard penalty, which is the same as a false start, which maybe doesn't seem that serious, but it's a lot more serious a penalty than a false start because it gives the option to the defense to either take the play or the penalty. And so it can be very bad. And McCary didn't have any of those this week. In fact, he did a very good job on one screen pass where he clearly knew the pass was going out to the left side, of kind of dancing right at the line of scrimmage without a partner, waiting for that ball to come out. And then I guess when he either figured it was out or heard it was out, then he got it in front of that play and made a nice block. So 8 blocks in level 2 would be the thing I would point to as the positive for McCary here.
So real quick, just you made a comment there that I want to just get back to about the dancing out in space, like waiting for a play to kind of happen. We saw that, I think, with Kevin Zeitler too on the screen to Drake where the fumble happened. Is that something that's a problem with the way they're being coached? Because it seems like, obviously, you want to be looking for work, but he looks like he's just, is it a timing thing it's off? Like, I feel like it could be better executed on those types of plays.
It absolutely and needs to be. An RPO offense generally has problems with that. The particular play you referenced is exactly the Zeitler problem play. It's IDP no flag on our score sheet here.
Yep.
And he got a 0. But it's exactly the kind of play. And Zeitler was 3 yards downfield probably on that play. So he was the most egregious of the day, although Mustapher had another one. You need to avoid those. You need to be so careful. And yet it's very difficult because the offensive line almost has to look backwards or wait for some sort of go code to be screamed, which, obviously somebody would have to be responsible for in order to know that he can cross the line of scrimmage. So you're always putting yourself in danger when you have the ball getting pulled from the mesh and the offensive linemen don't know whether to anticipate run or pass correctly. And it's got to be extremely well coached. And it's something I think the Ravens will get correct. It looked like basically from McCary's play, his dancing along the line of scrimmage, they did a very good job of learning exactly what he needed to do. They may have even talked about it at halftime because, or on the sideline at any time, because it had happened a couple of times already in the game by then.
Well, I certainly hope it's something that, the offense can get cleaned up because, I feel like historically the Ravens have been such a bad screen offense over the past, decade. Ever since Cam Cameron, really, they used to be really good at it back in the day.
In the Rice day.
But, now with Monken, you hope maybe that there's some hope to kind of be a little bit more effective with those types of plays. And, maybe it's a carryover of some of the coaching staff. It's hard to say for sure, but it's something that I think good teams need to have those plays in their back pocket when defenses are being really aggressive, when you're having trouble getting things going, when you're in the right down distance and it makes sense. If you can disguise it well and time it well and block it well, those can be really impactful plays in a game. And we just don't see them very often out of this team. So I'm hoping that that's something that they can work on.
Yeah. It'd be one of the ways that you can slow down the pass rush against Lamar is to show week after week that you can run 2 effective screenplays that, pants them on those plays where they're, rushing the quarterback.
Yeah. Completely agree on that. I guess we can move to the next player. We can just go, left to right along the offensive line. So we'll move on to John Simpson. What did you see from Simpson this week? He didn't have any penalty flags, which is a good thing, but maybe some other issues in his pass blocking.
Right. So he had 2 flags in week 2 that were a problem. And of course, with Simpson, that's the big problem in his career is he had a bunch of flags in Oakland. We don't need to go into those numbers, but is more than 1 per 100 in his career. So he didn't have any penalties this week. So nice to get back on track in that way. He did give up 2/3 of a quarterback hit when he was just overwhelmed by Buckner. So facing a quality opponent was part of what made him look bad occasionally. But he didn't do that poorly in terms of blocking overall. He gave up 1 other pressure. He surrendered a penetration on what was that's another pressure there, on what was a very tentative pull. So he was pulling on a pass play. He got over to the other side, and he knew he had to block somebody, and he kind of waited right in the throwing cone for the guy to show up and be blocked. It's one of these, you just got to know better than that, and that was a pressure that he got. He did block the guy, but it wasn't a good place to block the guy, and that obviously is not good. one of the things I see from Simpson a lot, and part of this may be he doesn't have the same kind of gourd-like build of many guards in this league. So you see, you hear people called apples or pears in terms, and a lot of guards are pears. They tend to have large rear ends and lower bodies, big hips, and a lot of their weight is distributed lower in their body. And they're big in the upper body too, but they have a lot of weight in their lower body, sand in the pants, as Mike Mayock used to call it, that helps them balance and whatnot. And Simpson is kind of built more like an offensive tackle, long arms, kind of more of a Michael Orr type build, top to bottom, and being sort of lean and muscular all the way top to bottom, which can bring up balance issues when you're trying to lean into someone. He's been very vulnerable to push-pull moves from opposing defensive linemen, and he's been on the ground a fair amount in the games. Now, that's bad, and I look at it on a play-by-play basis, and I say that's bad, and it's even a trend because it happens a lot, but I still score that on a play-by-play basis and tag him for it when it happens, as opposed to saying this is a general problem they can't overcome. It's a problem to the degree it's a problem in the game, and in this game it wasn't. That specifically was not too much of a problem, although the quarterback hit was an instance where it did occur. He missed a total of 7 blocks. 4 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. Now, I always separate those out because losses at the line of scrimmage are worse than, say, moving into level 2 and not being able to find a block, or even pulling and not being able to find a block, which can happen. So you don't want to have losses at the line of scrimmage where you're losing to the man and usually one-on-one directly opposite you.
You mentioned the failed or tentative pull. I'm not sure if we're thinking about the same play, because I'm thinking about a running play. That was a 3rd and 1 where they failed to convert. I think that was Simpson who was pulling, and the hole that he vacated was kind of blitzed by a linebacker, and he was able to make a tackle for loss. Is that a different play? And is that something? Play. Okay.
And that was an RL -2 on 3rd and 1. And let me find it on my score sheet here because it was on an important play. Should be the end of a drive, right? Because it made a 3rd and 1 into a 3rd and 3, didn't it?
It was. Okay, it was the end of a drive.
It's the beginning of the 3rd quarter, first drive. So they had 6 unbalanced right, and the guy Simpson pulled okay for a 1 on that play, but it was Mustafa who got beat because he couldn't pick up speed. The linebacker coming through the left A gap. And so it was a little bit of a difficult extension for him to get back to the back side of the play. So it's not a reach anymore, but he had to go back to the to get a little bit extended. That's not on Simpson at all. That Mustafa's got to make that block, or he's got to affect that pass, the rusher in some way such that he doesn't have an easy trip to get to the ball carrier. But yeah, I know the play you're talking about, and that was a really disappointing play for the offensive line and for Mustafa in particular to have that happen and end a drive.
Yeah. Did we want to finish up Simpson?
Sure.
Are there any more notes on
6 level 2 blocks, 2 pancakes, couple highlight blocks that were good. A B- is a huge difference again from PFF. Take a look if you want, but it's not a matter of the events. We agree on the events that occurred. We just don't agree on the weighting. And so they may rate somebody more negatively for being pancaked on a play. And I give him a missed block, but if it doesn't turn into anything, then it's just a missed block. So it's not the end of the world from that perspective. And I can see reasons why you might do it differently. But B- in this game anyway for Simpson. And his second consecutive B- exactly, which is exactly a 1-point landing spot there, because I only give it at exactly the bottom of the grade level there. And interesting that he's got exactly there for 2 consecutive weeks.
If you had to make an assessment in terms of pass blocking versus run blocking with Simpson, as someone he's only started 3 games now for the Ravens, do you have an impression as to where his strength lies?
During the preseason, I would have definitely said he's seemed to be pretty good at both, and he had an almost perfect preseason in terms of the ability to play zone, play power. And he wasn't getting pulled over as much. I think that during the regular season, I think we've seen more problems with him being vulnerable to these push-pull moves that could show up more as pass blocking problems when a defender is not trying to 2-gap you, but is actively trying to throw you to the ground and make a play themselves. And that's often going to be a 3-tech who would be doing that to you, or somebody who's playing directly over you even. It's a that probably is as a potential cause more problems as a pass blocker.
And we'll do one more quick follow up on Simpson because and it's something that I'm curious about, and there might be other Ravens fans out there as well. But going into the offseason, left guard was going to be a question mark, right? And the addition of Simpson he was on the practice squad, I believe, at the end of last year. So
yes.
he wasn't new necessarily, but I don't think he was really expected necessarily to become the starter. Do you think it's a position he's going to hold for the rest of the season? And have you been impressed with him so far?
I'm more than okay in terms of where he is, but not all the way to great yet, or by any stretch. But I think he's C, B minus, B minus in 3 games. A C is not a bad grade at all. It should be looked that way. And I know a lot of professors say that, a C is not a bad grade. And, and then you find the average at your school is 3.5 or something. So yes, a C is a bad grade then. But that's not the case on my grading system. If you looked over the years, a lot of offensive linemen, particularly in their first year starting for the Ravens, might be in that level. And then they ascend from there. You can project improvement. And we've already seen a lot of improvement from where he was in Las Vegas. So I think this is good. And I would project more improvement for the season. And I think that, I'm not sure if we had a chance to talk about it during the preseason, but Saleh, I think they had an artificial competition to basically light a fire under Simpson this offseason. And Saleh is not ready for an NFL field right now. He's a developmental lineman. And the notion that he should be out there ahead of Simpson was probably just encouragement to Simpson to say, clean up your game, stop with the excuses, whatever there might have been coming from Las Vegas, and there could have been plenty, and learn how to play football the Raven way, and you're going to be a good offensive lineman. And I think he's passed all the hurdles so far.
Well, I mean, I think that's good for the Ravens moving forward. He doesn't necessarily have to be an A+ player for them to be solid across the offensive line once they get some healthy players back. So I think overall, I would agree. I've been pretty pleased with what he's been able to do, and filling some pretty big shoes that were left behind with Ben Powers leaving after last season's really nice season from him. So I think moving on to center, we talked a little bit about Mustipher already with that one play, the inability to kind of catch the linebacker coming through the hole. But what other notes do you have on Mustipher from this game?
Some tough competition he's in there. So he bore the brunt. All the interior linemen had tough days, but Grover Stewart is a very good player, interior nose tackle / defensive tackle. And then they've got DeForest Buckner in there, who's one of the really good ones. It gives you a lot of trouble. So Mustipher allowed 2 penetrations. Both of those, the first one ended a drive. We talked about that play while we were talking about Simpson. He basically couldn't pick up speed coming into the backfield. That ended with a R-2 on a 3rd and 1. But he had another drive staller earlier when he was pulling and he could not maintain his balance and got shed by Kwity Paye. And that was one where he's pulling to the left, got shed, and then he dropped the ball carrier. And that was might have been on a first down run that went for either -1 or -2. Now, let me see if I can find it here on my score sheet really quickly. Oh, yeah. Okay, here it is. So it's on a 1st and 10, last drive of quarter 3, and the last series of that drive. He pulled, got shed by Paye, and the ball carrier got taken down for -2. Then they had an 11-yard pass that wasn't a first down, and then they failed on 3rd and 1. They had a 10-yard touchdown. It didn't stall a drive. It just was a negative play. That's all. I've got to fix that because I put that in the article that way. But now we've seen that. That sounds better anyway. He only had 1 pressure allowed in this game. Did have 5 missed blocks. 2 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. I included in those in the missed blocks the bad snap. So I gave him 0 on the play, and then I also took his entire adjustment away. That probably does not even fully reflect the proper penalty for that play. It's just a very severe play. I do wonder if there wasn't something else that caused that ball to be snapped. Like, did he think he heard something? What signal was he working off that he decided to snap the ball at that time? But Lamar clearly was not ready for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. to see that happen, it hasn't been an issue with him in terms of like how he's been snapping. At least not that I've noticed. It seems like, it seemed like an outlier. Obviously, a really bad time and place for that to happen was in that kind of series of events in the first half that were really problematic for the Ravens, and kind of got them behind in a game where they had the chance to kind of get out to a big lead early. But overall, second game starting, he's not been the worst fill-in for Tyler Linderbaum, and I'm actually similar to what Simpson has been able to do. He's been above decent, I think, and that's for someone who was just plucked off the practice squad, could have been on anybody's roster that wanted him. That's not the worst thing in the world.
It's the weirdest thing, but it's really Zeitler who let the Ravens line down more than anybody else in this game, and the players on the left side, even though none of them was perfect, they all had blemishes on their day in terms of Mustipher, Simpson, and McCary. Zeitler was really the worst offensive lineman in this game by far. But Mustipher, anyway, just to finish off with him, 7 level 2 blocks. You got to see the entire left side of the offensive line had 11 pulls in this game. So 11 times they were assigned a pull. They got a total of 2 points. Now, some of that is a penetration or a pressure allowed on a pull, and they had one of each of those that really knocked down their scores there. But that's awful. I mean, that is just terrible. And the right side, Zeitler and Moses went 8 for 9 on their pulls. So the Ravens have an interesting inverted line where they either are going to have to run more unbalanced and try and get away from some of the weakness of that they have pulling the ball, depend on Ricard to make more lead blocks without a pull being there, or maybe just continue to teach and hope that players like Simpson in particular can start to put it together and do what they need to do when they pull.
Yeah. Do you have any sense that might be just because essentially the left side of the line is basically backup / new to the offense personnel? The right side is a little bit more experienced, especially with the Ravens. Maybe as they get some more snaps under the belt, become more familiar with the cadence of the offense, the timing of those types of plays, and hopefully not go against an athletic front seven like the Colts every week. But the next couple of weeks are going to be pretty stiff front sevens as well. So like to see that be converted at a higher rate for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point, by the way. The continuity issues on the left side are a potential reason. And Mustipher's pull where he was off balance and he gave up the run for -2, it was a case where he had some contact with Simpson there. And that can be a problem that shows up. You have to know the dance steps, particularly if you're the center, to not get your feet tangled up with anybody moving behind you. And it also is incumbent upon the puller to know how they're moving from step to step. And of course, the defensive lineman also has a say in the matter by being able to push somebody back a little ways.
So I think, we can move on to Kevin Zeitler. You mentioned some of the struggles he's had early on in the season. It's, it's a little bit out of character for him. He's been such a steady player for the Ravens over the past 2 seasons, and he's really been a kind of problem for them on the offensive line through 3 weeks. And it's been concerning, and it's not something that I think even the casual observer could see the issues with some of the bull rushes that have happened to Zeitler. He's been pushed back into the pocket, 5 yards right off the bat a few times, and it's really affecting how the line is able to hold up in some of these passes.
It's a great point. I mean, he got very upset, I think, with Mustipher for not picking up a blitz and during this game. It might have been with Simpson, but it was one of the two, and I won't say which. But then he himself had problems picking up plays. He failed to pick up Franklin for one of the 2.5 sacks he allowed, and he failed to block either Franklin or Stewart, both who came from level 2. And it was this case where inside, outside, you just got to pick one and block them. Okay. And you're probably making the wrong choice if you block the outside guy, which means you better block that inside guy. And he didn't do it. So anyway, he knows what the rules are as an offensive lineman. He knows he didn't do the right thing on those plays, but he also got bowled straight up by Brian. And that's not a top end defensive lineman. That's not Stewart or Buckner. Those are the names you look to get those kind of a push on a veteran like Zeitler. But Brian pushed him right back into the quarterback. And I think he also dislodged the ball on that play too. Brian did, or it might have been another player, but he pushed him right back into the quarterback on that play.
I think that was the play where Lamar was sacked and lost the fumble, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure if it was him who was causing the dislodgement of the ball, but he was definitely impacting Lamar's ability to avoid pressure from the other side as well. So, having that player in your lap basically as soon as the ball snapped is a really bad sign. And like you said, Taven Bryan, he's kind of been a journeyman defensive lineman, first round pick by the Jaguars a few years ago. So, he has potentially a pedigree of, athleticism, but he's never really been someone you consider as like a high end defensive tackle either. So, I'm hoping that Zeitler can kind of break out of this funk and, work on his anchor a little bit. I don't know if there's any underlying kind of nagging injuries that are affecting him. Hopefully that's not the case because, we know the Ravens can't afford any more injuries along the line. But, if and when he's, still playing at this level, halfway through the season, do you think there's a chance that he gets replaced by a Ben Cleveland or maybe, another offensive lineman to come in and take some of the snaps like Makari?
I think that's probably unlikely barring injury. I think it's much more likely that he'd lose his job due to injury given his age and that Cleveland would take it then. Or if, they own up to some injury issues if he were to continue to play at this level for another 3 or 4 weeks. But Zeitler is playing, he's at a crossroads season right now. He needs a good season to get one more contract that hopefully will be 2 or 3 years. And the difference between playing at a B level where, we're used to Kevin Zeitler playing on a very consistent basis with not even a whole lot of week to week variation. There's some for all players. I don't want to say that there's none, but a very consistent B level, in his time with the Ravens. He's 3 years, close to $30 million he might get again, or he might get 2 years, $20 million. But if he continues to play at this level, there's a real question as to whether he's done at the end of this year. So hopefully, he'll pick it up, get a big contract from whoever, and the Ravens will wish him well, or maybe they'll even sign him again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on his play the rest of the year and what he's looking for in terms of kind of a contract to end his career. If we get the play that he's had through the first 2 seasons as a Raven, I would love to have him back. But if it's a lot more inconsistent and up and down, I think they're probably going to have to go in a different direction. You did mention though that the right side line that includes Kevin Zeitler were better on the pulls. Mm-hmm. So does that mean he's doing better in the run blocking part and the issues are more in the pass protection?
Yeah, almost all his negative scoring. He only missed 2 blocks in the game, so he allowed a pressure and 2.5 sacks. That was minus 17 points on 72 plays. So that was most of what went wrong in the game for him. Missing 2 blocks that's a low number for a game. That's quite good. So he made 4 out of 4 pulls, 1 block in level 2 only, which is not a lot for him. No pancakes, 1 highlight combination block, and a D after adjustment for Zeitler. In terms of what's going right from the run blocking perspective, he is the technician the Ravens still have who knows exactly what the dance steps are in terms of pulling. And they have one, typically their counter plays that they run from right to left are going to be either him and Moses in motion or Moses and Mustapher in motion, but not typically him and Mustapher in motion. And that is going to mean he doesn't get used on as many pulls as Moses would typically get used on.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you with fast, chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. If you're too busy this fall to cook but want to make sure you're eating well, then get Factor. This is what I did. We were moving, packed up all my dishes, everything needed better meals. I signed up for Factor. It's best meals, probably the healthiest I've eaten in a month thanks to these Factor meals. Because with Factor, you can skip those extra trips to the grocery store and the chopping, the prepping, the cleanup, all while still getting flavor and the nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat, enjoy, and then get back to crushing your goals, which for me was trying to move. But now I can't. I need them for work at lunch every day. They're perfect. So this September, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. So head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use that code Ravens50 like I did to get 50% off. That's Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off your Factor meals.
Well, you mentioned Morgan Moses. We can move on to him, I think, now. We talked about him a little bit last year, I think in the off season. One of my favorite Ravens just to watch, if you just to dial in on him on the offensive line, he's just a fun watch. He's a guy that is going to get a little chippy at times. He's going to have some real fun highlights. I think last week, he had one of the most fun blocks on a defensive back you'll see in the NFL. What do you have on Morgan Moses from this game?
He really loves to finish, and I like that about him too. No, it was another top shelf game from my perspective. A third of a quarterback hit was his only pass rush event in this game. He had one false start that's happened to stall the first drive of quarter 3, and I got to look at that again to make sure that was true. Yes, it ended up being ended on an RR -2, but on first down on that drive, they got themselves behind the chains by having a false start by Moses. So never good when a false start either stalls a drive, and false starts have a certain amount of negative value. But on the other hand, they're kind of a cost of doing business, whereas IDP penalties are much more serious, and we kind of went over that earlier. He missed 4 blocks, 2 losses at the line of scrimmage. That's not bad at all. 5 level 2 blocks. When you think about Morgan Moses, you don't think of a mobile player necessarily, but this year and last year, tremendous mobility. That's the component of Morgan Moses has been way above expectation. We hoped we would get the pass blocker we've seen. We didn't have any right to think we might get the kind of mobility that he's shown during this time. And he made 4 to 5 pulls, which is good to start with, but he didn't have any freebies. So the trailer on pulls will get a P1N on our score sheet, meaning it was a P1 where he didn't make a block, but he didn't have to because the lead blocker took the only available block effectively. But he did have a block presented to him and he missed it. In fact, he went right between 2 goalpost blocks that he might have made on his one missed pull. So I think it's been a good trust thing that Monken has not been afraid to use his mobility at all, and that's been nice. And yet they're still tucking him in to these unbalanced line formations and making use of his power as well. So A after adjustment for Moses in this game, he would have otherwise had a high B even without an adjustment. And really nice game again from Morgan.
Yeah, and getting back to his mobility, not all of his pulls have been left-handed pulls, right? He's had a few pulls where
pulls to the right too.
He's pulled to the right to kind of be like that lead blocker on the front side of the run play, and those have been very effective plays for the Ravens this season. I think he's been a big part of that, being able to kind of lead the charge out there on the edge.
Yeah, so that's typically a one gap pull he's making where he's just pulling around the tight end. And so it's a shorter pull, and you would expect him to be a little better. And he's also leading, so he has to hit. And if he doesn't hit, you really know. But he's very good about conserving momentum as he moves. So the guy I really attribute that to in Ravens history is Vontae Leach. Of all the fullbacks they've had, is a guy who he didn't want to turn and make a U-turn block to try and just make sure he connected on pull. He wanted to conserve as much momentum as possible and flatten somebody. And that always has a certain value to it, because a downfield block where a player is just completely off his pins, that guy's probably out of the play, and that's what turns 10-yard gains into touchdowns or 30-yard gains. So you really like to have some of those in a game. But Moses has a lot of that. He's a great finisher. And he is more of a positional finisher, even with the momentum. But he really likes riding that guy for about 5 yards and then putting him on the ground at the end of the run, which I know you've probably seen him do so.
Yeah, I love the way he finishes the plays and finishes his box. He's just a joy to watch for me. Mm-hmm. I guess that pretty much wraps it up for the offensive line. Do you want to move on to some of the other skill positions?
You know how this works. You're the guest. Please hit us up with the first guy you want to talk about.
So there's a few thoughts I have here. I'm going to start with someone who I think has been underutilized in the offense, and there's actually two players that I want to talk about in the same sense. But Isaiah Likely is the one that immediately comes to mind. He had a really nice it's like a seam catch up to set up the first Ravens touchdown, the first drive. He has the ability to kind of be an intermediate threat in this passing offense, and he's not really getting much use. He also had a really critical drop in this game.
Yep.
That basically, in some senses, cost them the win. I think if he makes that catch, they probably kick a field goal and win the game. So that's unfortunate, and that might be part of where the maybe some of the lack of a role is coming from, because he had some issues with drops last year as well. Something he has to clean up if he's going to be more integrated. But I still think he's someone who can really have an impact in this offense, and we have seen more 12 personnel usage by the Ravens, especially if you consider Ricard a tight end at times, the way he's lining up. I think that's something that I think the Ravens could really use as a way to kind of dictate personnel and the way that they're going to kind of use their offense. And I think Likely has a chance to kind of shine in that. If they want to not necessarily always be in 11, they've been in 11 a lot, but if you can go to 12 and kind of run or pass out of it, that's a good place to be.
You make a really good point there. And they had 78 tight end snaps in, I think is it 72 total? I've got to look at this again because the game book. Yes, it's 72 total on offense. I guess every single one of the Ravens plays had to be non-penalized for that to occur, which I didn't realize. That does not often happen, because I think they lost the snap count 84-72. But it was anyway. They had 6 plays where they had doubled up on a true tight end, and then they had Ricard in for some plays as well. They're running much lighter this year in terms of the number of heavies they use each play. But I agree with you. I mean, I think I got to get Likely by the productivity on a per snap basis before I worry too much about how many additional snaps he's utilized for. So he's gonna replace Andrews for a certain number of snaps, and Andrews played 59 of 72 in this game, so he had some opportunity. He just needs to make something out of those, and he did have a good play, and then he had a really, really bad play, and that's the kind of play that you can really lose trust with Lamar on. That the next time you don't get the football. One of the questions I asked Todd Monken when he's at the podium in camp was, is it necessary to scheme the ball more broadly to fulfill defending every blade of grass in the way you've described the offense is running? And effectively, that's how I said it. And he said, well, some of it's scheme, and we're going to try and get to that. But the other part is these players individually need to make plays so they build trust with Lamar. And it's like anybody. It's like, you get the ball in basketball because the rest of your teammates trust you to make the 3-point shot to win the game. And, you're whatever the case might be. Any team sport is generally going to work that way. And he's right on the money. I mean, you're Likely has to earn some additional trust and earn some additional currency in the bank with Lamar, frankly, in terms of his own play.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just one more point about Likely, because and I might be wrong about this, but I think we've seen him get targeted on each of the first drives the Ravens have had this season. So he's gotten targeted and gotten a reception on each of the first drives. And that's normally like a scripted type offense where he's trying to be integrated and given, a target that's going to go to him. Like it's because that's the way the offense has been scripted. And then after that, he kind of just goes away by the wayside. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of get him more touches by using him as maybe the first read and some of the looks that Lamar's going to have.
That's an outstanding point there, because they have those plays scripted in at least 2 ways. One is for personnel they're going to have on the field, and the other is for the play. So on those first 15 or 20 plays, they know the combination of personnel and route they want to do. Now, if later in the game they just stick the package in, and then Andrews is going to be the guy, they still will have a package of plays for Likely. I'm not saying there aren't other plays that they could have ready and scripted for Likely. You'd like to have more of those, and okay, we're going to go run number 17 now, which means you got to get Likely in the game for Andrews, kind of thing. That's fine. But you make a great point that the more you see it was a scripted play that likely got the football, the more concerned you should be about the trust between Lamar and Likely. That was your point, right?
Yeah. So hopefully that trust grows, and it's going to have to come through success. I think, like you mentioned, with Lamar and Monken, I think a similar thing has to be formed with the receivers and the quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll let's talk about Rashad Bateman. And in some ways, it may be kind of moot at this point because he's hurt and he may miss time. He's probably going to miss some time, but we just don't know how much at this point. There is some kind of a thing going on where Bateman is just not first in the mind of Lamar Jackson in terms of getting good reads, even when he's open. You alluded to it, I think, in the first show. A lot of good stuff in the first show about scheme and things that, if you have not listened to it, please go back and download it. There's a lot of good stuff, particularly Gabe brought up about that. But I thought Bateman running open and not getting targeted is something there where Lamar maybe have a read by read look and not as much of a full field look, where he's trying to really diagnose in a broader sense what's going on as the play's developing. And for whatever reason, Flowers is the first hot, and the second hot is Andrews, as he always has been, and that just doesn't leave a lot of room. All the other receiving weapons that they brought in, are basically sucking hind teat, as the former CEO at my company would say on this.
Yeah, and he was the other person I was alluding to as someone who I think for the offense to really be kind of clicking at all levels, Bateman has to be more involved. He's someone who is a very good intermediate target. He's shown the ability to get yards after the catch. On film, at least, he's shown the ability to win versus zone coverage in particular. I think he's a little bit better now versus man. He's had some struggles, I think, in terms of being able to get separation. But I really think that he's kind of an afterthought right now in the offense. There's a couple of times that he's gotten targeted on some quick throws that have been positive in nature. But in this game, two of the targets were uncatchable. One was kind of like, I don't know if it was like just a slip out of the hand, but the ball is basically a ground ball that Lamar threw. Another one was thrown out of bounds on a deep pass where Bateman was a targeted, but the ball wasn't ever even remotely catchable. Right. So hopefully there's just some maybe you just change the sequencing and the reads and get him some first looks as a first read in the progression, so that he can be more incorporated into the offense, because that's only going to make things easier for everybody else. It's going to make it more open for Andrews. It's going to make it more open for Flowers. If you have more receivers that are going to take the attention of the defense, it just makes it a better offense all around.
I mean, first of all, I agree across the board on that. And he's one of the guys who should be a beneficiary of Flowers taking the top off, because he is an intermediate guy. And when you have more time to have routes develop more naturally, or Lamar's extending plays, I think Bateman will be much more valuable, because he's a guy who needs to get to the top of the stem in order to make his move. He's a very good route runner. Definitely, that was his big thing out of Minnesota. His big negative was drops. His big positive was he's a great route runner, can run the entire tree, and has a little bit of wiggle to make that cornerback make a mistake there. Now, that's not Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, it's all about him being so sudden as an athlete, you just can't possibly keep up if you're trying to guess. With Bateman, it's really about he can make you make the wrong move. And it'd be nice to see Lamar take advantage of that and Bateman get back on the score sheet in a meaningful way week after week. Because, he should be a 4 to 5 catch a game guy and not a 2 to 3 catch a game guy.
Yeah, I completely agree. He has a talent. He's a first round pedigree. I'm hoping that the injury isn't serious and he doesn't have to go on IR and he can come right back and be an integral part of the offense. But at this point, it's kind of a wait and see. And it's disappointing that if he never really becomes that player that he could have been. Part of it's due to injury, and and part of it might just be due to the new pecking order of weapons that are in the offense.
Yeah.
My turn for another player. I'll go with Kenyon Drake. his impact in this game was pretty much negative. But the upside was he looked really good on that screen until he fumbled. Like, I think he has some juice that he can bring. We saw it last year. He had some games where he had some really big performances out of the backfield for the Ravens. He brought some much needed kind of explosiveness into the running game. If Edwards is going to miss time, and if Justice Hill is going to be out for a longer period of time, and Keaton Mitchell isn't back yet, if I have a choice between handing the ball off to Drake and handing the ball off to Melvin Gordon, I like my upside with Drake more than what I'm getting from Gordon. Gordon to me is more of a plotter. He's I would say kind of a Gus Edwards type, but without the vision and without the kind of ability to pick up more chunk yards in the open field. I know they need bodies there, and that's why he's on the roster. But I think that for the most part, there's more upside with Kenyon Drake in this offense if they need to have that kind of a fourth or fifth option out there at the running back position.
Right. And I would agree. I think that Drake gives you more, and certainly on first or second down. I think it's probably true on third down too, honestly, because Gordon has not been a very good pass blocker. And if you look at Gordon's PFF grade, I've never seen anything this distinct. But Gordon's like 9 years in the league, and his PFF pass blocking grade has gone down every single year. Every single year. It's like trends like that are hard to miss. And he's just not the guy you probably want out there on third down. Whereas Drake, one thing he showed us last year was that he really did a good job of finishing runs when given good L2 opportunities to start with. That he could make somebody miss an L2, but did a really good job of putting away runs and running away from defenders in level 2. And that was not the case, of course, with Dobbins, despite the fact he had good field vision and made something out of those opportunities. He was losing a lot of the last yards towards the goal line.
Yeah, and this game, Drake also had the unfortunate, I guess, outlet pass to Lamar in overtime where he was, I don't know if it was a miscommunication or he ran the wrong route, and that might just be like a chemistry thing. But Lamar kind of threw it behind him. Drake had kind of made a cut to come back upfield, and I don't know if Lamar was expecting him to stay in the flat. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, or maybe Lamar was just, he had a player right in his face. He was getting rid of the ball. It could have been the situation as well. But he was open. Like he was that outlet on that play. He could have potentially caught that ball and ran for a first down as well. I think he provides that in this offense, and if need be, I think he's someone that you can kind of lean into to kind of add a little bit of that, catch and run ability, the ability to kind of take a 3-yard gain potentially into a big play if he can make a man miss.
How did he do in 22 in terms of receiving? I just got to look at that back for a minute. So he did have 17 receptions, averaged only 5.2 yards per catch. So he only averaged, looks like about 3.5, little less than 3.5 yards per target last year. Not what you'd want, but I even though that's a fairly substantial chunk of plays there, I think a lot of that can be put on the fact the Ravens were playing such incredible small ball by the time he got in that it became a difficult thing for him to do much. And just the 24-yard play, probably if he had held onto the football, probably would have been his best play of last season. Yeah, it would have been. His long was 19 the entire season as a receiver. So,
But we have seen what he can do in the open field, as a runner. So I think, it's just a matter of getting him the ball in space. And I think that is a feature of the I'm gonna say Greg Roman, Todd Monken offense, as opposed to the Greg Roman offense, where it's kind of just like a around the line of scrimmage check down. Seeing more receivers in routes with the ability to run and actually pick up positive yards. I think he can do some good work in that role if given the opportunity.
Yeah. I'll pick a player here. Let's talk about Nelson Aguilar, because I think his role is about to increase for the Ravens. He's played well the last 2 weeks, caught 4 out of 4 for 39 or something this week, and had 5 out of 6 last week, including the touchdown. So first of all, he's catching the football, which is important and is the biggest knock on Aguilar being a consistent dropper. So that's nice. There seems to be a little bit of a connection between him and Lamar. We certainly saw that in camp, that he was a receiver they liked, that Lamar seemed to like. But anyway, I think he now is the guy who obviously moves into that X job. There really isn't anybody else at this point. You can isolate if you want. You can isolate Flowers on that side of the field for some plays, but I think it actually takes away some of the threat of Flowers to have him over there. So it's probably nice to have Aguilar on that side and do some things with him. More is going to be asked. I think, if you had the over on Nelson Aguilar's total targets for the year, you're probably going to win at this point, given where how often the Ravens have gone to him in these first 3 games and where that projects to go over the next few weeks. I know some national people had him for like 16 targets or whatever and 11 catches for the season, and I think it's it's going to be a pretty big number for Aguilar right now in terms of potential targets.
Yeah, kind of an underrated signing in the offseason. I think Eric DeCosta is on the record saying, he was someone that felt fit a need. They weren't sure if they're going to be able to sign a bigger fish like an Odell Beckham at that time, and Aguilar would be able to come in and add another dimension to the offense. I think he can be a deep threat. He's always been someone who has speed. I think he still has that. But I think where he's made his most usefulness in this short season so far has been catching those balls over the middle, the intermediate routes that we were talking about earlier with Bateman. I think Aguilar can slot right into those as well. And he has shown that ability to make the tough catch. The drops have not been an issue with him. He's made some really pretty catches. The over-the-shoulder catch to have the touchdown against Cincinnati was really nice. He's had some other ones that have been contested, and he's come down with the ball. So that's something that I think we're going to definitely have to see more of if these injuries continue to pile up. And I agree with you. He's going to be someone who's going to be probably a significant contributor throughout the season. Even if everybody comes back healthy, I think he's proven that he can be someone who's a regular in the rotation. Lamar seems to trust him, and we've talked about that already several times in this episode. He's gone to him many times in kind of big situations without any thought about it at all, and that says something to me.
Yeah, I completely agree there, and I don't think there needs to be any artificial building of trust with additional scheduled schemed targets to get the ball to him. I think it's much more natural in that case. Kind of a big target too. In some ways, at this point in his career, I'm not saying the speed is all gone because he certainly was a very speedy player when he first came into the game, but some of the speed is probably gone. A lot of his game is more about wiggle at the top of the route, and he plays more like a tight end than he does a true, outside wide receiver X or Z, whichever side you want him on. But I think he's pretty much going to be forced into the X role for a lot of the snaps over these next couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the timetable of some of these players. Beckham and Bateman as the key players who are hurt right now. So if Aguilar and Flowers are your two 1 and 2 receivers as your it's not what we were expecting at the beginning of the season, but I think they could be in a lot worse position than they're in right now, as we've seen as recently as the end of last season. So I like what I've seen from Aguilar, and I think it's something that can be built on as we continue to go through the season.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe one more player.
Sure.
Real quick, just want to shout out Gus Edwards because he's been really good for the Ravens through this 3 games of the season. I feel like as Ravens fans, we don't always appreciate what we have, and I know I'm guilty of that as well. I thought there was times where I wasn't even sure if Edwards was going to be on the roster this season. They restructured his contract, so it became clear that he was. But he's been a really important player for them. Last week was critical. I think we saw what happened when he was lost in this game. The inability to gain those first downs in critical drive after drive in the end of the fourth quarter and in overtime, not having that player who could get you a critical first down on a second and medium or a third and short really hurt them. And I think he'll be missed if he misses time. I think even if he is able to play, he's still going to be somewhat on a pitch count. I think that's kind of the way they're using him. They don't want to they don't want him to be a guy who's going to get 20 touches in a game, because he's very important, and they don't want to wear him out. So I'm hopeful that, he, comes test clean through the concussion protocol and is able to contribute, because in the coming couple weeks, he can be a really big factor for a couple of teams that I think you can potentially run on a little bit, especially the Steelers. The Browns have been a little, better defensively than I think anybody anticipated, but they haven't also gone up against, a really functional offense yet. So we'll see how that matchup goes. But I think if Gus Edwards is on the field, the Ravens are going to be better for it every single time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Gus has been one of those consistent running backs in the history of the National Football League. He's again at 5 yards per carry this year. That's one of the real questions I had, was, were the Ravens going to be as effective running out of a lot of 11 personnel this year? But Edwards has been fine with that. And he's also been in the game with Ricard probably a little bit more as the season has rolled on, because he's been the guy they brought in the second half to close it out against Cincinnati, to help close it out against the Texans, although that didn't really work quite as well. He's been remarkably consistent in his Ravens career, and he's one of the players we really need to celebrate. Probably his last year as a Raven, but maybe the Ravens have enough money to try and sign one or two of these players back, whether it's Stone or Edwards, maybe Dobbins now, with kind of a tenuous situation for him, or even Zeitler.
Yeah, and I would throw Justice Hill in there as well. I think he's someone who's also
signed for 2 years already.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah.
Wrong about that. Yeah, then I think I would like to have Edwards back among those players listed, but it's going to be a tough offseason, I think. There's a lot of free agents that are going to be up, and can't bring them all back. So
yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it could be a case where Hill is cut for salary cap reasons, but he is signed through. I think he's about a $3 million cap hit next year.
Yeah, you're right.
All right, outstanding. We've run a little long here, so I think we're gonna have to pass on the mailbag. We of course don't have MVPs in a game where the Ravens lose, so we're not going to try and do that. But Gabe, I always have to tell you how much I appreciate talking football with you. You taking time out of your busy schedule. We don't call you Dr. Gabe Ferguson on the show, but we know you are, and we appreciate you making the time for us and all you bring to the table in terms of this discussion.
Well, I always enjoy coming on the show, so thank you for having me. Wish it could have been talking about a Ravens win as opposed to a Ravens loss, but I think there will be plenty more victories over the rest of the season. So maybe we'll have another opportunity to get in here after a win. But it's beginning of a long season. I think there's a lot of positive things moving forward. I'm looking forward to being able to talk with Ravens fans on my podcast and when I have the Jordan Situation Room. So if you like my kind of conversation or the points I like to make, feel free to download and listen to that one. We'll have 2 podcasts each week, and also available on Twitter to talk anytime at Gabe Fergie. Love to talk about the games, the comings and goings, players, moves, all of that stuff.
All right. Other folks, I think by now you know where you go if you want to be on a Film Study Shorts. Hit me up with a DM, but also say hit us up with a subscribe if you haven't already, or maybe convince somebody else to hit us up with a subscribe to the podcast. We always appreciate that when we can get some new listeners that way. Listens have been fantastic, by the way, this year. Really appreciate the incredible loyalty of the listener base here. When I interact with you, whether it's on Twitter, by DM, by whatever method, you guys have an amazing capacity to recall specific instances where, in particular, that I make a wrong prediction, and I really appreciate that. That means you're a very loyal listener to the show, and want to thank people for that. Gabe, thanks again for coming on.
Anytime, Ken. Just give me a call.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.